So, with that, let us dive in. So, Parshat Vayikra, um, Vayikra with the little aleph, right? The book of Leviticus. It's called Leviticus because uh, when it was being translated, the early translators, I guess, into Greek, uh, saw lots of rituals around sacrifice and the priests and thought, oh, well, this is all about the Levites, which is not quite accurate. I mean, it's not inaccurate, but it's a little bit of a misnomer. Vayikra just means, and he called, because it's the book is named for the first word in the book, and this is God calling out to Moses, giving him instructions on how the sacrifices would work, right? There are all these different categories of sacrifices. We've talked about this before, right? All these different ways in which, moments in which one would bring sacrifices forward for giving thanks, for sort of expressing awe, for trying to make amends for either having sinned or done something wrong, right? Trying to get some sort of reparation to return to a sense of stasis within the community. Also, we know later we see texts on if one is deemed impure there are a whole variety of ways in which one can be deemed ritually impure, whether it's menstruation or childbirth or a scaly skin disease called sara'at, which we have talked about, I think, enough that we don't need to go into it right now. Lots of different ways, right? In addition to one's actions, there are also conditions that will render one impure. And so sacrifice is also the system by which it is part of the process through which you return not only to a sense of purity, but a sense of being able to rejoin the broader community and kind of participate fully in community. And I think what's interesting about this system is when we think about sacrifice, what do you usually picture when you think about making, not yourself, but in the way the Torah talks about it? What is it that you often think about when you think about, okay, you're called to make a sacrifice? What are you supposed to sacrifice? What kind of animals? Cows, sure. Lambs, goats.
Kosher.
Kosher animals, excellent. I heard, Natalie, I heard you, but I'm not going to say it yet. Yeah, birds. Birds. But I would put cows, lambs, and goats over here in column A, and I would put birds in kind of more of a column B. Why? Well, I would say, yes, they're less expensive. They're also smaller, which I guess some things that are smaller than bigger things are not necessarily less expensive. And what are some of the like restrictions or requirements about some of these animals? Unblemished. That I heard that in a nice cacophony just now. The best you have. Thank you, Ellen. Any other important requirements or restrictions? Yeah, Jeff.
Agricultural products too, right?
Agricultural products, sure. We have like first fruits, but also kind of there's that expectation, right? That it's the best of your crop, right? Is what you're going to bring. So I think that is largely the case. And what I want to look at with us this morning is this interesting layer of sacrifice in which it starts off with the sacrificial system that we think of, right? If you incur guilt, so it's actually not you've necessarily actively done something wrong, but it's more that at some point you realize you've done something wrong. It's a relatively minor transgressions, but this category of sort of like realized guilt starts off by requiring a sheep, as we would expect. But then it actually shifts a little, and I think so. That's what I want us to look at. Any questions so far? And as I pull this up, and we'll dive in. All right, I love it. Yes.
When you go down the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The actual process of sacrificing, was it the same as they do now with a cow, a kosher cow, or a goat, where they drain the blood? Is that how they killed them, or they just cut off their heads?
They did not cut off their heads. Uh, I don't know that there was as much concern necessarily in kosher slaughter, the way that we picture kosher slaughter. That's largely rabbinic.
I thought that's what they did. That's
Well,
why.
but there's a lot of detail in the way in which the animal is broken down and then placed upon, and the order in which each part of the animal is placed upon the altar. So sort of. Let's go Ellen and then Dahlia, and then we're gonna dive in.
Ellen Taffine, I have a problem with this.
Yes?
Needless to say.
No, wait, what? Go
The
ahead.
problem is, why would I want to sacrifice a living thing? I don't mind the first fruits of the year or the first harvest of
Sure.
something else, but we're all God's creatures.
Yes.
And in order to adore him and show off for him, I have to take the life of a living being that he actually created.
Yes. I think to a certain extent, some of that is your / our modern sensibility showing. But I actually think that on a deeper level, you're actually hitting something really interesting. I once, my 5th year of rabbinical school, I had a student pulpit in Butte, Montana, and I gave a sermon about, I think I was talking about like kosher, like eating kosher, like the rules of kashrut and like the elevation of how we think about what we eat. And it was really interesting because a rancher came up to me who raises cows and chickens and said to me, I really appreciated your sermon because, even though, yes, like I raise cows and I eat them, but when we have a meal that is an animal that we have raised, like that animal is an invited guest at our table. Granted, I don't know that I would want to be an invited guest at his table. But that sense of respect and connection that you're talking about, I don't think this system dismisses that, actually. I think it actually lifts it up. And I think this is, keep in mind, this is a culture and a society in which they are keeping animals, right? And not only are they keeping animals, but on some level, the greatest commodity that you have in your life, especially wandering through the desert, let alone once we get to the time of the temple, right, where people are living in not great conditions, but their most valuable asset is their animal or animals. Maybe they have multiple. And so I think that this system absolutely recognizes the sanctity and the value of those animals. This is something I try to convey with my B'nai Mitzvah students. Like, we think about sacrifices kind of like with this ick factor of like, oh, you have to like slaughter an animal. But the connection that you probably had to that animal is so profound and so deep. And you are really giving up something of incredible wealth. I mean, it's like, I would say to a certain extent, it's the equivalent of saying you're going to like just give up your Lexus because you want to offer thanks to something. But I would actually say it's probably even more valuable than that, relatively speaking, because there was probably a connection. Like this was the animal that you probably raised from infancy. Now, granted, there was also a system, especially in the temple, where you could go to the temple and you'd buy your sacrificial animal. So not everybody had this deep emotional connection. But I think that the emotional connection to the animal is actually part of what's so profound about this system, is this idea that, for these different categories, particularly though around like atonement for sin, like you are required to give up something of incredible value in order to repair your relationship with society and to kind of re-enter society and be able to participate in a full way again. Which I think to a certain extent is maybe meant as a little bit of a deterrent, but also sort of recognizing like it's going to take, when we talk about sacrifice, it's a significant sacrifice. Dalia, go ahead.
Shabbat shalom et boker tov, Dali. I just happened yesterday to listen to a shiur that explained that yes, you do cut the throat of the animal, but that's not the sacrifice.
Right.
The sacrifice is the blood that you collect and the Kohanim are putting to burn on the Mizbeach. So that's the technical gory part of it. And the question that you try to raise is why? And the why that was suggested, it's one theory. I don't know if it's the ultimate one, close to what you are saying, but even more than that. A person sacrificed to get closer to God, and to get closer to God, that person himself has to get closer. This is impossible. So he do something instead of to stand for him. And it has to be something that is as dear to him as his own blood. So that's why it has to be unblemished. That's why it has to be the best. That's why it has to be all the things, because all those things are him. And if he does not identify fully with that, the work is not done. The miracle of getting from underwater to above water as a relationship to God cannot be possible. So it has to be really, really serious, deep, maybe gory, that stand for that person.
Yeah. And one other thing I would add is yes to everything you said. And part of the reason that it's unblemished is also to avoid saying, oh, well, I'll just take the runt of the litter, right? And just sacrifice that one, right? It's got to be the best, right? It's got to be something of incredible value. So I want to take the comments on Zoom. I want to look at this just sort of, I like this framing from the Sfat Emet, or the Sfas Emes, as some might say, on sacrificing. And I think this speaks to, Dalia, a little bit of what you were saying. One's offering is a coming near, right? The Hebrew word for sacrifice is korban. And there's actually debate about whether korban is actually linguistically connected to the word karov, like to come near, or if it's just a really nice drosh that rabbis like to make. I stand by it. Even if it's not grammatically correct, I like the connection. But one's offering is a coming near, a korban, a sacrifice, or a drawing near to God. And that is the desired goal and the end of the matter. It makes no difference whether you give more or less. The end is one, coming near to God. This is the very meaning, in fact, of direct your heart. Like the offering, you are drawn after your own root. This is the life force of divinity which has been placed in everything. And one thing that I'll often say to B'nai Mitzvah students, and I think it's an interesting sort of thought exercise, Dalia, to your point about this idea of connecting with God, right? We see it as sort of ancient and barbaric, and we don't do that anymore. But think about what was going on through this process, right? You take this living thing that is killed, and it's placed in a very intentional way upon the altar and lit on fire. Now, what happens when you light something on fire? What are the things that you see? Smoke. Right, fire, smoke. What happens to the thing? It's consumed by the fire. There's an odor. And what happens to the smoke? It goes up and then? And then maybe this comes down, depends on how thick the smoke is. But in theory, a normal fire, right? The smoke goes up, and then when you're looking up, it goes up, 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 up. And then what happens? It disappears. So you can understand in the mind of, I mean, it's not such a far leap even for us. You watch something like, of course, God is consuming that animal or that sacrifice through this process of it being lit on, right? The thing that was tangible that I was just walking over here this morning has been slaughtered, placed on the altar, and now is gone or cooked. I mean, some instances they're not completely burned up, but they're cooked. But the better part of it is gone, and it's gone up and disappeared into the heavens. So like, yeah, God is consuming it. Okay, hold on. I see lots of hands, but Naomi and Elaine and Barbara and Randy.
Yes, thank you. In comparing to the sacrificed story of Isaac, it's nothing.
Yeah, because
Nothing.
Abraham
And
got
I was wondering what was written before.
right.
What was written before the story of Isaac, the readiness to sacrifice your own children for something that you may not believe in, which is happening today too, or sacrifice an animal that will replace the sacrifice of your own people. So what was written first? Do we know this
That's a
part
good
of
question.
the story of
I don't know. Rabbi? Akedat Yitzchak was first. Right, and that makes sense. That was kind of my sense also, but that makes sense because it really is sort of, it's a polemic in a lot of ways against human sacrifice. Although, Naomi, your point is a good one, right? It sort of seems like Abraham's pretty willing to go along with that plan. You could argue how reluctant he was or wasn't, but he was doing it. And it's really God that steps in and intervenes. Though, to Harv's point, it's a story written by people trying to teach a particular value. So it's also, look, so much of the Torah is also saying, this is what the rest of the world does, or the other communities around us does, and this is what we do that is different, and this is why it's different. Okay.
Yeah, whether it makes sense what we are doing today. Sacrificing for what?
Well,
That's all. I'm done.
no, that's a good question. I mean, and I think when the temple's destroyed in the year 70, the rabbis push that the notion that tefillah becomes sacrifice, right? It's avodah shebalev, a sacrifice of the heart rather than a sacrifice of a physical sacrifice. Elaine, go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Harv.
Shabbat Shalom. Just a couple of points that, if you have to choose the best to sacrifice, then there's a certain level of consciousness about that. It's not like you go into the closet and taking out old shoes to give to somebody, you might want to give new shoes. So that's kind of a state of consciousness, but I want to relate this to mana. It's like the people who are making the sacrifices, my understanding, were not vegetarians or vegans. They were eating meat anyway.
Yeah.
So and I'm just thinking about the manna. People weren't satisfied with this probably vegetarian, insubstantial food. They wanted meat. So these are meat-eating people. So
Understand.
I mean, I would have a hard time doing that because I'm basically vegetarian. But for people who are eating meat, I mean, they may feel like this could be on my table or feeding my family, right?
Well,
So that might be the difficulty. And the other thing, really, I just want to throw out one more thing. Like if the idea is like not the killing of the animal, but the blood, if you go get a lab test, they can take out a lot of blood from you. So like, I know they didn't do that then, but maybe they just take the blood out, leave the poor animal alone, and then dash that blood on.
It's both, right? It's also part of it is that you're not wasting the blood, right? That you're not just pouring the blood out into the ground, because it's which is a distinction, Jeff, between kosher slaughter and a sacrifice, right? The blood is being preserved as well as something that is sacred and holy and is used as part of the sacrifice. There was something else that I was going to say about what you had just said.
Consciousness or consciousness.
About wasting the animal. So or access to. So there are different categories of sacrifices that are there are some sacrifices in which the whole thing is really burnt up. There are some sacrifices like the Pesach sacrifice is a great example of essentially you're just roasting your little lamb on the altar, and then the priests get to consume some of it, and you get to consume. Right, it's a big barbecue picnic. Essentially, was what the Pesach pilgrimage would end with or include was a big, cookout, essentially, right? Where people are cooking their lamb on the altar and then they're allowed to eat it. And there are some that the people offering the sacrifices are allowed to eat some of it. There are some where only the priests are allowed to eat it. There are some that are meal offerings. There are some where the whole thing is consumed. So there are different categories of sacrifices that serve different purposes. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, Randy, and then Harv. And then we're going to go to the text. Why not?
Hi. Some practical lessons from experience living on the mountain in Haiti, and also
Randy, are you able to turn your volume up at all? Your mic volume?
I don't know how to do that.
Oh, just get a little closer to your microphone.
Oh, all right. How's this?
Better.
All right. Some practical notes from life on the mountain in Haiti, where when Madame Decles's goat tripped one day and broke a leg, she had no choice but to butcher it, which she did. And then she ran around the mountain trying to sell the pieces of meat, which people nodded at each other and said, well, we'll wait till late in the day or tomorrow when she really has to sell it at a lower price. Similarly, in Vietnam, there were different sacrifices. The first story is not about sacrifice, but about the necessity of invention. When a baby was born, you would sacrifice a chicken. When a big man in the village died, you would actually sacrifice a water buffalo. But by the time I was there, these were really just token that nobody was about to kill a water buffalo and distribute the food. It was, they would use a smaller animal. But the thought to me occurs that we have the luxury of so much food and animal food and options available. But in those situations, trust me, people did not have I don't even think there's a word for protein in Haitian Creole. People were not obsessed with that. To eat anything at all, and you needed a fire, you needed water, you needed a cooking pot, it was a huge deal. So I think this, stepping back and looking at the pragmatics, I'm thinking that those ritual animals back in the biblical day, a lot of them might have tripped and fallen and broken a leg or been less than perfect. This is why the text emphasizes that it has to be perfect, because a lot of times it wasn't.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks,
Listen,
Randy. All right, Harv, and then we're gonna go to the text.
This is more in the nature of a question than a comment.
All right.
I look at our attitude and we're concerned with the meat
Mm-hmm.
and the blood.
Sure.
What if these ancients, before the time of the rabbis, were more concerned with the spirit of the animal and were seeking to release the spirit and to somehow or other benefit from the capture of that spirit and give it to themselves to hearten themselves and forgive themselves from something that they feel bad about. Not necessarily what we call a sin,
right?
But they just feel bad about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it almost connects to what Ellen was asking in some ways, right? Because I think we're squeamish around like the blood and the guts and the gore and the the kind of the gore of it all. But I think, look, I think the human history of sacrifice, I think, is what you're speaking to, right? These were all the things. I mean, and perhaps this is why, like, because of those sensibilities that are probably in the awareness of the Israelites or the biblical author, whenever, when these stories are being written down, there's an understanding of that. I mean, I think that's perhaps why there's so much detail in it being such a precise handling of the animal. Perhaps it's in response to how, some pagan cult did or didn't handle the animal with a certain level of respect or whatever. And I think that's also part of the, like, there's a lot of, over and over again, there's this sense that like the animal's like spirit is in the blood, right? That's why blood is handled so carefully and intentionally. Is there is this sense that the animal's life force is in the blood, and so perhaps some of that is present here. All right, let's go to the text. Jane, do you want to read for us? We'll start in chapter 5 of Leviticus, towards the end of the portion. This is this kind of last category of sacrifices.
Okay. Can I make a comment first?
Sure.
Okay. Apropos of what Harv said about the spirit part, when I asked the Chabad rabbi if there would be, when the third temple is built and Messiah comes and all of that, whether there would still be animal sacrifice, and he said yes. And I was surprised because he's a vegetarian, and he explained that he wasn't saying this was the reason for the animal sacrifice, but he talked about it actually raises the spiritual level of the animal to sacrifice it to God, and that there were different levels of the soul and of spirit, and so you want to make it go upward, and this was a benefit to the animal too.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Leviticus 5:1-6. If a person incurs guilt, when someone has heard a public imprecation, but although able to testify as having seen or learned of the matter, has not given information and thus is subject to punishment. 2, or when a person touches any impure thing, be it the carcass of an impure beast, or the carcass of impure cattle, or the carcass of an impure creeping thing, but does not attend to it, and then, being impure, they realize their guilt. 3, or when someone touches human impurity, any such impurity whereby one becomes impure, and though knowing about it does not attend to it, but later they realize their guilt. 4, or when a person utters an oath to bad or good purpose, whatever a human being may utter in an oath, and though knowing about it does not attend to it, but later they realize their guilt in any of these matters. 5, upon realizing their guilt in any of these matters, that person shall confess having sinned in that way. 6, and they shall bring a penalty to God for the sin of which they are guilty, a female from the flock, sheep or goat, as a purgation offering, and the priest shall make expiation for the sin on their behalf.
Okay, so this seems fairly standard practice here. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We've spent a lot of time talking about the nature of sacrifice. Everett Fox in the Shokin Bible, his comment, he says, the public voice carrying a threat. That is, testimony has been called for, but the person with knowledge has not come forward. The threat is one of a curse on that person. One scholar reminds us, Levine reminds us that testimony then, as frequently still, took place under oath, was thus connected with the name of God. So the offense described here was a most serious one. So it's interesting, sort of, even though there's sort of this, like I would say, more minor. These transgressions are more minor in severity. They are not insignificant and unimportant. Barbara, do you have a question?
Yes, or a comment. I was just struck that the idea of getting, I guess, redeemed from one's sins sort of depends on one's self-awareness. That, I mean, if you don't really acknowledge that you've done something wrong, then you can't you sort of don't get rid of the guilt.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, and on some level, like that's the whole point of Yom Kippur or Cheshbon HaNefesh leading up to the high holidays, although technically you're really supposed to be engaging in Cheshbon HaNefesh every day, right? Thinking about like, oh, did I do anything wrong yesterday? Or even at the end of the day, have I done anything wrong today that I need to apologize for? So in theory, there's kind of a system in which we're supposed to be thinking about these things. But it is, yes, to your point, like it's an interesting category because you've done something wrong, but not so obvious, like you've slugged a guy across the face and then ran away, and you're hiding from your guilt. It's more that you this idea of testimony is an interesting one, right? You saw something, and maybe you sort of assumed, oh well, somebody else must have seen that, so I don't need to come forward. Right? Part of this is also thinking about the way in which they're trying to make sure that people are participating in, I don't know, in sort of the judicial or legal system, right? If you see if you see something, say something dynamic. But if you haven't said anything and you thought, oh, somebody else will take care of it, like actually that's still understood by the Torah as a transgression. You've abdicated your responsibility here, and so you have to make amends. And to a certain extent, yes, like it's not something, Barbara, to your point, it's not something that there are like witnesses to that somebody else is going to call you out for. Hey, I saw you see that thing and you didn't come, right? Like nobody else knows other than us. But it's kind of that, what Maimonides talks about, right? That for sins between one human being and another, for sins between one human being and God, Yom Kippur atones, but for sins between one human being and another, Yom Kippur doesn't atone until that person has made teshuvah, right? And on some level, this has kind of a little bits of both, right? In theory, if you haven't, right, and that's part of the sacrificial piece, right? If you've hurt somebody else, you also have to make amends to that person, even in the sacrificial system, before you're really qualified to then make a sacrifice. But so it's an interesting category. Okay. Larry, go ahead.
So, what percentage of Jews follow the laws today? Not that many.
Like halacha, you mean?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to assume that the Jews of today and the Jews in Sinai are probably proportional. And I mean, it just makes sense that not every one of the 600,000 who are wandering the desert are going to follow. And so suppose you don't make a sacrifice. Okay. What is the consequence of not doing the sacrifice? It's okay, especially for these things which are
choose your next words very carefully. No, go ahead.
Which are only known to yourself. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So
what do you think the implication is?
Well, I think the implication is that the Torah doesn't care.
Oh, see,
Wait.
Go ahead.
There is clearly, what's the word? Cherem?
Excommunication.
Excommunication. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's clearly spelled out.
Yep.
But not with regards to the not doing a sacrifice. So in some ways, I think the Torah is giving people an out. You don't really, I mean, because there really is no severe, now it may weigh on your conscience or whatever that is. I mean, that it's
so
just,
okay. So your point is heard. And I think actually, the Torah cares a great, I would say that the Torah cares a great deal about it, to the point that like, some peripheral, like Amcha, right? Like Jew out on the periphery of the camp, has done something, falls into this category of transgression and does not make amends. And then somehow comes along and and makes another sacrifice for something else, they have essentially the Torah understands that as an existential crisis, actually, because what they've done is they have then affected the purity of the entire system, right? By them not, because yes, even though it's between them and God, right? This is on your conscience, one could argue. And okay, so right, because this notion of purity is, we've talked about this before, of holiness, of sanctity, of purity, is so key that everybody coming into contact with the temple cult or the sacrificial cult has to be in the correct state of purity. Otherwise, it risks destroying the whole thing, right? The whole purity of the system is violated. Now,
So the question really is,
but
can you get close to God without sacrifice? And I think that Buber tries to answer that in this book that we're reading with Rabbi Kahn.
yeah, but he's a few thousand years later.
But it's still
Just say
it's still important to recognize that sacrifice is not part of Buber's thought.
Maybe not, but certainly but the idea that sacrifice is replaced by prayer is not an insignificant one, right? That you're not just like reciting prayers. You're really meant to be, like, at its best, prayer is offering up pieces of yourself in place of sacrificing animals. Now, when you were talking about it, I was thinking about the roommate that I moved in with my senior year of college, who had a kosher vegetarian kitchen, and had a shelf, because I moved in second semester and he had a different roommate first semester. And I was kind of into this whole kosher kitchen thing. And his roommate first semester, hadn't kept one. And his roommate the first semester thought it was ridiculous and so there was a shelf in the kitchen of all the stuff that like the old roommate had trafed up, right? Like, we're not using that bowl anymore because, Freddie had put put a piece of chicken on it or whatever. But like, if I had put a piece of chicken, so there's sort of an honor system there, right? Because in theory, he could have just washed the dish and put it back in the thing, and Daniel would never have known the difference. I smell chicken bits on this, right? But it would have trafed up the entire kitchen. Because then the sponges trafe, and then you're washing your other dishes with your trafey sponge and trafing up all your dishes. So it's both theoretical, but there's also if you believe in this stuff or if you're practicing this stuff, there are serious implications. In my own kitchen, there have been moments where the cleaning lady washes all the dishes with the other sponge, and we just kind of are it's gone through the dishwasher. It's fine. We don't have enough dishes to throw this out because of some. And also the idea that you can come close to God. This was the vehicle through which people came close to God in this moment. There was no prayer in this moment. There was communal life, and this really was the axis mundi. Right, the place in which heaven and earth touch was on the altar. Right, that's where you access the divine, and you're able to send your stuff up to God, and God sort of takes it and says thanks. Oh my God, too many hands. Hold on, put your hands down for a minute. I know there are lots of controversial thoughts here, but kind of to Larry's point, I want us to look at least at one of these examples, because this is, so when we were talking about what gets sacrificed, Natalie mentioned birds. Well, a bird is not a sheep, right? And a bird is worth a whole lot less than a sheep. So what do we do with that? So we have, for this category, and Larry, this kind of fits with what you were saying, right? You could say, well, I can't afford a sheep, so I'm out. But this also gives us an insight into how important the sacrificial system was in Israelite society to make sure that everybody could participate, period. So the imlo tagia yado, die set. If there, so it's interesting that in verse 7 and verse 11, the translation is this, the English is the same, but the Hebrew is different. So just to put a pin in that, literally, like, if his hands cannot reach enough for a sheep, right? But if it's translated by the JPS, if their means do not suffice for a sheep, what do? They shall bring to God as the penalty for that of which they are guilty 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a purgation offering and the other for a burnt offering. In other words, if you can't afford a sheep, here's an alternative, something a little bit more affordable. And then it goes even further, that if, and it's the interesting thing here is the Hebrew is different. Im lo tasig yado lishte torim o lishne bnei yonah, right? If, again, it's translated as if his means do not suffice, but it's literally if one cannot attain. Linaseg is like to obtain or to obtain or attain or get hold of or grasp or comprehend or afford or suffice, right? So it's not an incorrect translation, but it misses the nuance that there are 2 different verbs being used here, right? If their means do not suffice for 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, they shall bring as an offering for that of which they are guilty 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for a purgation offering. They shall not add oil to it or lay frankincense on it, for it is a purgation offering. So we go yet a degree smaller or more affordable, right? So we've gone from sheep to pigeons or doves to meal. And certainly the cost of each of these gets lower and lower and lower, and those who are able to afford it gets higher and higher and higher. So I think, Larry, to some extent, this kind of is one answer to your question. Well, if you just said, screw it, like nobody else knows I did this thing. This is sort of saying, look, we're going to make it really easy for you, Larry. Just like swing by on your way into work and like drop off 50 cents and you're good. To a certain extent, right? Okay, Barbara, you'd had your hand up before. Go ahead.
Berlowski, Shabbat Shalom. I have a totally different type of a question. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this all. They were slaves in Egypt. And when they left, they were given jewels and silver and all this. But I never heard or read where they were given lots of cattle and birds to keep in cages and so on. And they're slaves. And they're wandering in the desert. And they have no food, but manna raised down. So they still don't have their own food of sheep and goats and birds and everything where they could cook and not rely on manna. And suddenly, all of these 4 former slaves or descendants of slaves have the cows and goats and lambs and caged birds because
they've had it with them. The assumption here, yeah, some of it's given to them as they're leaving Egypt, and probably they were keeping, even I don't know if this is a fair correlation or not, but like even in the South, in the midst of the harshest slavery, like slaves were keeping little gardens and they were keeping, chickens and, so I think the sense is this is a kind of moment of human society where like this was just a thing that people had around.
So they had their livestock and maybe birds, and the manna was for the non-protein, I guess.
Yes.
That they would get. Is that how it's thought of?
Yeah, the manna was for the humans. It's an interesting question, right? There's not really like much. I can't think of a single passage that talks about like what the animals were eating in the midst of all this wandering
of the sand.
But in theory, they were grazing and they were, because keep in mind, even though the Israelites are wandering through the desert, in the travels, like the places in which they're stopping, they're not just stopping in the midst of wasteland, like they're stopping at the watering holes, right? At the oases, the oases, right? Where there's enough to water your animals and graze your sheep. So actually, I mean, that's on some level why they're encountering all these other peoples through their journey. It's not like these other tribes are just necessarily like hanging out in the middle of the desert, like in a western, waiting for them.
So
Like-
they might have left Egypt with animals that gave birth to other animals
Yes.
along the way.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Joshua, and then Jeff, and then Shelley.
I'm going to try to offer a reconciliation
Great.
between what Larry is concerned about and something that Delia brought up, and this notion of the burning of animals and the smoke rising. So first of all, each of these verses begins with va'im. Im, meaning if.
Yep.
Giving the people who may feel a need to sacrifice agency. So they always are granted this alternative,
Yes.
right? If.
For this category
always-
of sacrifices, right? It's not every category of
But
sacrifices. where
every
it's-
verse,
Yeah. Right.
almost everyone begins with va'im.
Right.
And if. The smoke is, getting God's attention, not just looking up and saying, oh, well, God smelled it, that's good.
Right.
But bringing God's attention to us. And in the case of Buber and others, talking about our more currently relationship with God. What is it that God expects? What is God asking of me? And, getting God's attention and also wondering, what is God asking of me? There's a connection there, which I think is important to think about.
Right.
In this case.
And there's something really beautiful about, to your point, there's something really beautiful. This was actually, I wrote a sermon, a Devar Torah on this my first year of rabbinical school, and kind of stumbled on this verse, which was great because I had just finished social work school. And I love this notion. I called it, and in some places it's referred to this way as a sliding scale sacrifice, right? The rabbis call this a korban ole v'yored, right? Which you could say it's a sacrifice that is higher or lower, but I love the kind of like the imagery of it's one that also, to your point, it's one that goes up and goes down, which I don't know if that quite grammatically works, but I like it anyways, right? But it's so Ibn Ezra is kind of one of the earlier strata that talk about, right? For all manner of work is done by the hand. It is the means by which one acquires, right? If his means do not suffice, right? If his hand cannot reach, the clause alludes to one who does not have the means, right? So it's all about, and there are other sources that say, well, if a rich man though gives a poor man's sacrifice, he has not fulfilled the obligation, right? That it really is meant to be, I would argue it's very similar to our fair share dues system, right? Each according to his means. Yeah, it's on you to determine what the correct amount is, right? What you can afford versus what is too much. But the expectation is not that you're going to be stingy or cheap, right? Like, oh, well, I could certainly afford a sheep, but if I can get away with just sacrificing a cake, well, that would cost a whole lot less. No, it's got to hurt. But for some people, who have nothing, being able to get enough to sacrifice just a little ephah of flour, like that hurts, right? This also later, I think, informs some of Maimonides' thinking about his rules around how we give tzedakah, and the sort of proportionality of it. So it's a really fascinating, I've always been really intrigued by this particular system. And with that, I have to end because it's 10 o'clock and I have to drive up to Santa Rosa. I know there's lots more. I'm apologizing now. Next time I'm here, we can talk all about sacrifices and sliding scale, but for now, let us bless. Let God's great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One of blessing be glorified, exalted, and honored. Say amen. God of bless you. Hold on. We're going to start over. I knew there was something missing, Steve. Let the glory of God be extolled. Let God's great name be hallowed in the world whose creation God willed. May God's sovereignty soon prevail in our own day, our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say, amen. Let God's great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One of blessing be glorified, exalted, and honored. Though God is beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations that we can utter. And let us say, amen. God of heaven and earth, grant abundant peace to our people and their leaders, to our teachers and their disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah here and everywhere. Let there be for them and for us all grace, love, and compassion, a joyful life, sustenance, and the hope of your sovereignty. And let us say, amen. For us, for all Israel, and for all humanity, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true. And let us say, amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world. And let us say, amen. Amen. Shabbat shalom. Have a good day, everybody.